Dr. Clayton Callaway, Doctor of the HiTone, Doctor of Hiwatt history, and actual dentist. Welcome, sir. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks.
So just how did it start? The Hiwatt fascination, the fixation?
Ever since I really discovered the Who in my teenage years, I just loved them as, ever since the first time I can remember hearing them. And gosh, I remember looking at album sleeves and seeing Pete standing with these, these walls of these Hiwatt. What are these Hiwatt amps? I mean, you don't see those things out in rural Indiana. It's like, there's a lot, there's Fenders and Marshalls and some Voxes and, all the, lower level stuff, but you just, you don't see a Hiwatt. And that was probably the first real thing. And then, I always loved Pink Floyd too. And then I would see, you'd see, like from Pompeii or whatever, all these Hiwatts, and it was like, oh, he's using them too. And so once I finally got out of school and had a little bit of disposable income, I was on eBay, buying stuff. And then, in some cases, it'd been pretty abused. And so I was, fixing it up and repairing it.
How do you get into repairing them?
Well, I've always been really handy. I don't know. Anytime I see something, I can just build it or make it. And I guess I credit my dad for that. Yeah, I just get inside these and it's like, oh, okay. Or, here's a picture of what it's supposed to look like. I'll just make it look just like that. And yeah, it's been great.
So, and if I'm correct, I believe you have owned or do own, the totality is 77 Hiwatts.
Over the years I have. Yeah, I've only ever had, I don't know, 26 or 27 amps at one time. I've had to, once you get married and then you're like, well, how come, how many of these things do you have? How many do you have? How many do you really need? And so there's a lot of shifting going on, something, if you got, several, earlier mid 70s that are almost identical, it's real easy to let one of those go to pick up an oddball.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, unfortunately, yeah, when you have to.
When did you start?
Oh, it was the early 2000s. Fortunately, at Mark's website and the old Plexi Palace, that was a pretty good site back in the day.
So what is it, as you discovered Hiwatt, getting into the guts of it? I mean, obviously Townshend set the model for so much guitar. We're going to do a video on that. I mean, he's really, he and Hendrix, to me, he's kind of my Hendrix. What is it about, he really helped work with Dave Reeves, who was with Sound City, for those who don't know, and was working the Mark III of the Sound City that became the Hiwatt, with Townshend kind of working with him.
I guess to be clear, he wasn't with Sound City. They contracted him to build a line of amps. So he was never an employee there, like some of the stuff you see on the internet. Yeah, they contracted him to build this line of amps, and he took it on to help pay for and build their house in New Malden. So yeah, but yeah, those are what they call the Mark I's. That was just the amp he decided to build for them.
And so what was his motivation? Because Townshend was kind of going for, well, Entwistle went to Sound City first, if I recall, and Townshend kind of went and said, yeah, well, I've been using Marshall, but I want something a little more, bigger, clean power.
He was, he was a RAF, electronics tech, and then went on to work for Mullard, and Mullard was, purchased by Philips, and he was their electron tube, guru. And then when solid state stuff came in, and he was made redundant and let go. And so he was like, well, I've on the side, I've helped, a few guys work on their amps and stuff. And I need to find something to do to, to support my new family. So that was, but as far as I just feedback from, from Pete and any other, local artists that came in, and I think that's why there was so much variation in the first couple years of them. It was, yeah, there's somebody wants it to do a little more like this, somebody wants a little more of that, and yeah, because there is a lot of variation.
And that's within that magic first 1,000, correct? Where there's just it's
Yeah, that's a safe ballpark. It was just a little over 1,000, but um, yeah, yeah, yeah. It'd be like, I don't know how many of them were actually one-offs, but he's like, okay, yeah, okay, we'll make 3 or 5 like this, and we'll make a handful like that, or it's some of the circuits. It seemed like they actually didn't vary very much for maybe like 50 or 60 units, and then there would be something different. And especially then in those days, in the garage in New Malden, it just any given artist would come through there, and he'd pull one off the shelf and modify it a little bit, or if it was just a little bit, or it could be quite a bit, I guess. But yeah, that would be hanging out in that garage in the late 60s would be really fantastic.
oh, for sure.
Fly on the wall. And
I mean, that's really kind of it is, or was at that time, a boutique amp. I mean, the custom really meant something.
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah.
What is it, if you could elaborate on what is it that the HiTone does certainly differently than the Marshall or even the Box or the Orange, the Fender?
Yeah. Well, there's probably two parts that are at least play the biggest role in that. The power supply and the rectification is, the power supply is really beefed up on these. Probably, well, I guess that's what Dave wanted. I'm sure it was designed that way. So you're not going to get, like a lot of sag when you hit it, especially if you really dig in and hit it, so direct. But that and the phase inverter circuit, it's fairly unique. It's not like what you see in Marshalls and Fenders, and it really drives the signal to the power amp. It evolved a little bit from the late 60s to halfway through model year 1970. Not a whole lot, just a couple resistor values basically. And
You're kind of focusing on that 71 to 74, the classic 4-hole circuit. Is that accurate?
Yeah, just the classic early 70s.
Now you'll also, pardon me, you also do the DR201s, the 401s on custom order?
No, I'm not doing a 400. I don't know, Glynn, if you see this, forgive me, but I really think the 400s were kind of an afterthought. The 201 from a layout and design viewpoint is just a masterpiece. And it's like they were trying to squeeze a little bit more out of the same layout. And I don't think they were as reliable as the 200s were. And I know they're not nearly as rugged. I mean, if you drop one, it's just because the sheer mass of the transformers, if it doesn't break apart the head cabinet, it'll really make it loose and wobbly. And I've had a couple of them, and the sheer mass. If it doesn't land flat on the ground, it'll rip the transformers right off the chassis. Just because the nuts and bolts that hold it on, it'll just pull right through that metal. And that kind of goes against, at least early on, what they were all about. They were roadie proof, compared to any other handmade tube amp, and they were just so much more reliable, so much more rugged, and the 400 wasn't.
Well,
Uh,
sure. I mean, I've got a couple of 200s. I think one is actually a Sterling import, so not a real Hiwatt. But anything with 200-watt transformers has got some heft to it. So the
well, yeah,
400,
they're massive already. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
So you mentioned Glynn, so I'm glad. Glynn is, of course, the son of Dave Reeves, Glynn Reeves, who with whom you have partnered. And have you worked with Glynn since the start of Hightone?
yeah. Yeah. Well, and yeah, and I've known him for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years before that. Um, but yeah, we wouldn't have done it without their involvement. I'm kind of a purist, I don't know, high watt snob in those cases, but I I just think it's improper. I wouldn't have done anything like this without the Reeves family's involvement. Um,
And so, how did you come to meet one another?
uh, I had on the old Plexi Palace vintage amps forums. Um, there was all these different bulletin boards for different amp brands, and um, I don't remember whose idea it really was, but somebody came up with the idea of having this vintage Hiwatt convention. Um, and yeah, so it wasn't my idea, but I read it. I read it on there, and I thought, you know what? There's always I've always been I've always heard that some people are talkers and some people are doers, and I've always been I've always been a doer. So I was like, well, I'm just gonna have one. I'm gonna set it up and see who all shows up. And luckily Mark did. That was the very first one in '06. That's where I had emails back and forth with Mark before, but I actually met Mark and for the first time then, and it wasn't a very good turnout. I think there was only like 8 or 10 people there. Um, but Glynn and Daphne, Dave's widow, came, and I didn't know they were coming. They walked in, and I remember looking over. It's like, look at this little old lady just walked in, and but I think I bet they're looking for it was at our local county fairgrounds. I was like, I bet they're looking for another building, like a quilting exhibition or something over a couple of buildings down. But no, it turned out to be them, and it was awesome. Just really terrific people and interesting stories, and they still live in the same house in New Malden.
Did they say why they showed up? Did they want to just kind of get to know you or the company, or
they thought the at that time the current owners of Hiwatt had something to do with it, and they wanted to see what was going on and how they might be using Dave's name, like so many people over the years have just tried to profit off of his name, and some from some minor relationship they might have had with him through the years to absolutely no relationship whatsoever.
yeah, it's a muddled history for sure.
Yeah.
But what has endured certainly is the creation, that Reeves creation, that inimitable turret to turret. Would you, for picking nits, would you say it's truly a point to point hand wired, or it's turret board is really?
No, yeah, it's a turret board construction. Yeah, the hand wired ones are truly point to point. They're not very pretty to look at. If you're careful, they they can sound good. But no, they look more like a rat's nest. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. But yeah, the turret board definitely helps make things rugged. Got little shorter pieces of wire that can get bounced around and create microphonics or RFI issues, undesirable noise. It's not the most cost-effective way to build them, but it's a pretty good way to build them.
Let's go back to Glynn. He is kind of sourcing or helping you source components that most closely match what the circuit requires or responds to.
Well, he hasn't had too much for the last couple of years because we got him really down. But yeah, at first he was. There's just a few things that first starting out when you're just trying to buy stuff here are just not the easiest to find.
Now, do either of you play?
A little bit. But I'm not very good anymore. I don't have any time to anymore. So the only time it seems like I get to play is, for a couple minutes, making sure the amps work properly before I box them up. When you'd see them from the 70s, at least ones that came from Harry Joyce's shop, they'd have the ink spots on them, and that's how we go through and well, Mark is helping me now do some of the standard DR preamp boards, and he'll when he gets the boards done, he'll mark them in red, and just as you go through and trace your circuit, make sure the circuit and all the connections are proper. On the boards that I do here, I don't do them until I get them in there, but that's because I already know I got them right. But then once I get them all in the amp and make all the connections, then we go through and I and with a meter and check every connection all the way through it. And so we just ink it off once we go through, and we know that that turret or that solder lug is everything's correct right there. We mark it off so we know we've been through it. So that's the first step. And then I burn them in typically just overnight, about 12-14 hours, with a signal running through, let everything get really good and hot. And most of the time, really with these and most of the voltages that it goes through, if there's going to be an issue, it's going to happen within the first few seconds, really. But we cook it, we soak them overnight, and then after that, I assign them a serial number and put the serial number tag on.
So how many are you up to? And as Hiwatt did, you number the heads or amps and the cabinets separately, correct?
Right. Gosh, so I want to say amp wise, 366 or 367, I think is what I did yesterday. Cabinet wise, I don't know offhand. The Eclipse cabs like that are styled after the WIM Super Starfinder, they have their separate line, and they're only, what am I up to? It's either 108 or 109 on them. We've only been doing them for a couple years. The original highlight style cabs, I don't remember offhand. It's close to 300, I think. It's a lot for basically one guy, but it's not, we're hardly some big factory that are pumping out, truckloads of gear.
And to your right is, if I understand correctly, just to confirm, the 68 silver grill option.
Yeah. I love it. Glynn loves it. We don't sell all that many of them, but it's cool. I think it's cool. If you're really old Hiwatt, diehard guy, you think they're cool. But
and you've also done, if I saw recently on Instagram, you've got a metal badge on one, at least.
Yeah. When we first started, when we came out with speaker cabinets first, because there's still a lot more good old fully functional 70s Hiwatt amps than there are speaker cabinets. Those speakers are just a little motor made out of paper and fine wire, and especially when you abuse one with a Hiwatt, they have a finite life cycle. And so every year at these vintage Hiwatt conventions, I was having blown speakers, and that's $200-250 for a speaker when you can find one on eBay, or or find one that doesn't already have a voice coil rub because they were overheated and abused. I was like, that was one of the first things we started doing was, really good quality speaker cabinet, and a good speaker, which was our DRF.
And now and you worked with Eminence in Kentucky to do the DRF, which modeled after the speakers that had won the shootout several years in a row, correct?
Yeah, yeah, and originally it wasn't supposed to be a shootout. It was just it was more like a taste test, at least in my mind. I'll digress a little bit. On the internet, you'll see people talk about, oh, my purple fanes or my purple back fanes. Well, that really tells me they don't know much of what they're talking about, because there was at least 9 different fane models that they all got the same decal. So my thinking with this at the convention was, we'll line up as many of the different speaker choices that we had, the same amp and the same guitar player, and we'll go through them all and just do a taste test. It was supposed to be more educational, but somewhere along the line, somebody called it a speaker shootout, and it sounds a lot more exciting that way. But yeah, there was, it was the popular favorite. It was never unanimous, because, everybody has different, nobody has the exact same taste. But the popular favorite was this one cab, a 1978 rear loaded cab that I had got from Jesse Valenzuela of the Gin Blossoms. And it's a great sounding cab, and it relatively oddball speaker. They only used that model of Fane for like 4 to 6 months in the first half of 1978. We were talking about this, and I really wanted to do either the Fane 122 231 or the 122 142, which were the 2 most common models used throughout the 70s. But Mark was like, if we have the best marketing research available, we have, all these 5 or 6 years in a row where this one speaker cab was picked out, to be the popular favorite by arguably the world's most diehard Hiwatt junkies. That we have guys coming from Canada and England and all over, driving from Seattle to here, which I was like at least 1,800 miles. And, and we got that kind of marketing research, and they say that, that almost every year they keep picking this speaker as their favorite, then that's probably the one we should go with. And I was like, oh, that's why you're the man, Mark.
There you go. And now,
among other reasons, Mark's awesome.
So now you had the DRF, and then the 231. You came out with a 231 version more recently.
I think it's about 2 years old now, maybe just over 2 years old. Well, no, you know what? That's not right. This whole COVID year just really throws up my history keeping. It could actually be, it's probably like 3.5 years old, I bet. And I really like it. Most of the time now, it's my favorite. Between, if I just want to all around, classic 70s Hiwatt sound. It's the DRF is a little brighter, has a little more top end. It's a little more aggressive. Sometimes it sounds like it's angrier or something. And the 231 is not all that different. The low end is almost exactly the same. But it's a little more mellow. It's a little woodier. And I've had a lot of people tell me that, it just sounds it's just a little more musical. And sometimes the DRF almost sounds like it's yelling at you, like it's just, rock all the time. And the 231, I mean, you can definitely rock out with the 231, but it also just sings a little bit more, a little easier or something. I don't know. There's not a big difference between them. They're definitely related. You can tell. It's just, there is a little difference.
And then you had crescendos as well, or you still do those?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. Yeah. We do them. We gosh, and my old buddy at Eminence, who's no longer there. He was a casualty of COVID, and but he's actually gone out and they're developing their own line of speakers, and but great guys, and boy, I can't say enough about them. Well, I can't say enough about Eminent Speaker to begin with. They're, you know, bunch of good people, and I mean, they loved it that we were, you know, I was so picky and would, you know, would want, you know, would want to keep changing prototypes and keep, I when you're gonna create something, especially that has as much of a fanatic, you know, following as, you know, the old Hiwatt stuff, or and you're gonna sell it, especially in a world with the internet. I mean, it needs to be right, or people are gonna get on the internet and start, and, you know, and bash you. And yeah, if I was gonna put my name on it, it had to be right. So yeah, the Crescendo, we spent probably 4.5 years working on that thing. And thank God they didn't have an accountant watching over us, because they would have shut that project down a long time ago. And it's funny that the Crescendo, we have to supply 2 different outside parts for them to assemble them with, because it's not a part that they would carry for any of their other speaker models. Or so and that was part of it. We went through everything they had, trying to tweak it. And, you know, I had a lot of old Crescendos over the years, and I wasn't bent on making the speaker frame. I didn't even want the speaker frame to look right, because I had a lot of them that came in from shipping, and the magnets were so big on them, they broke those old cast frames. It was so we went with the real heavy duty industrial Pro Line speaker frame. And, you know, it doesn't look anything like a 1970s Fane Crescendo, but and I don't care exactly what it looked like, as long as it sounded exactly right. And actually sounds exactly right, and is 10 times more durable. So I consider that a win.
Explain a little bit, if you would, the difference between rear loaded and some of the I guess in the early 80s, maybe even the late 70s, they started front loading some of the cabinets. What is kind of the sonic, or just, you know, the simple endurance issue?
Yeah, gosh, it's been several years since I've had a front loaded one here to AB with, but from what I remember, the rear loaded ones are more directional. They have what Pete referred to as like the kill zone. And the front loaded ones, they dispersed it a little bit more. Gosh, I want to say they didn't have quite as much of the bass, you know, the kick you in the gut bass, which, you know, a lot of guitar players actually don't like that much. But that's, from what I remember, that's it. And it's been, gosh, at this point, it could have been 9 or 10 years since the last time I had one. So there might have been some other subtle differences, and I just don't remember.
So we've spent a lot of time on the speakers and the cabinets. Of course, we can't not discuss the transformers and how you've been using Habor, of course, to replicate the original Partridges. How did that process work to select and tweak and tune it?
I had tried the Hibers. They'd already had a fairly good 100-watt set that you could buy from Mojo or Mojo Tone. And I tried those at first, and I tried, I can't think of what the one that Mercury Magnetics made, probably still does make. And the Hibers sounded more authentic. The build construction was definitely more authentic. So I contacted them. I had a couple different old partial PA heads that I'd accumulated, and so we'd run signals through them, and me and Mark would, and just kind of reverse engineer them. And we did that with the 200 also. yeah, they're just, you know, they're just about perfect. I don't. We on the power transformers, we tweaked the primaries so that you know, you don't, most of the places in the US, you don't want to run your amp on, you know, 110 or 115 anymore. It's you're getting, you know, at least 120, some places 124. I've heard from people that claim they're getting as much as 126 VAC out of the wall outlet. So ours are designed to see 120, so that the internal voltages will be, you know, correct, like they would have been in the 70s.
Now, of course, later in the Biocron era of Hiwatt, they started using some Drakes in there. Have you ever heard AB the difference on those, the Partridge versus the Drakes? Was it that dramatic a difference in your view?
It's not very dramatic. There's a little bit, just a little bit more of a hi-fi-ish. If it's more noticeable, you know, without effects. You know, in most live settings, you're not going to notice, you know, in a live setting, you're probably not going to notice it at all. You know, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of cork sniffer territory a little. Maybe not as much as some things, like when you get into, you know, certain, you know, tube rolling and that kind of thing. Because it's, you know, you know, it's a small part of the tone, but it is noticeable.
Speaking of tube rolling, of course, the older Hiwatts had the availability of those fantastically robust Mullards. Today, the tubes are maybe not so.
Right.
And of course, Mark has talked about adding the bias mod, and you see some amps with bias mods. Hiwatts, my 72103 has they had a bias pot added in there, and the 201s, actually someone did a really extensive dissertation on the 201 bias issues. But how hot can you run your heads? Did you do anything special to kind of you know, if you had new old stock tubes, you could really crank it a little more?
Oh, you could have. Yeah, the bias range is there if you wanted to run them hotter. I haven't messed with that for a while because we're really just, I don't have a whole lot of time to experiment, and we know right where we need to be for, you know, reliability, and that's our main goal. Is, you know, it's obviously they're going to sound right, but we need to make sure they, you know, we get as much mileage out of the tubes as we can.
Have you gotten any customer feedback that says, oh, you know, I switched from X to Y, not to tout any particular brand or anything, but just, you know, any feedback, you know, tube amp doctor, et cetera, et cetera?
I'm trying to think. You know, every once in a while, somebody will say they, you know, can I get them with the new Russian Mullards? And yeah, I can definitely put them in there. And they're not bad. They sound pretty good. The Chinese ones that Tube Amp Doctor was making, you know, was having made several years, they were pretty good tubes. Something happened in China and they moved the facility, and those haven't been available for a year or two. And I don't know if they will be again. But just within the last few months, I've gone back to using the JJs, and the distributor I get them from here, they're, you know, they burn them in and match them, and their matching is a lot closer than the so-called platinum matching that Electro-Harmonic or Sovtech does on the, you know, the Mullards. I've been pretty disappointed in that, how not close they are. But you know, it was a rig rundown I think I saw with Joe Bonamassa. He was talking about his Fender model, and he's gone to just using all, you know, JJs in them because they sound pretty darn good, and you can get them if you're on the road. You can get them almost anywhere, and they seem to be consistent, pretty reliable, and readily available. Prior to COVID, but most of our amps were on the road somewhere, whether it was just little guys in their Winnebagos playing clubs, or the Pink Floyd acts. And as much as in my past I used to tube roll and try to tweak them and make them sound, it comes down to reliability and availability. And I really like those TADs, but they haven't been available for over a year, and it's like, I don't know, they didn't sound that much better. I mean, they sounded good, but the JJs still sound pretty, definitely in that ballpark. What a good EL34 is supposed to sound like. So excuse me.
Now you've sent, speaking of artists, you've sent amps out of country. You sent them to the UK. There's actually a little video of Pete Townshend's late guitar tech Alan Rogan kind of offering up a slew of small amps before the recording of the latest Who album. And there's a HiTone right there. Just wonder if you might talk about some of the artists who you're serving with your amps right now.
Yeah, I really would love to see Pete tour with ours, but I don't think he's going to. Our gear is pretty big with the, in the Pink Floyd family, extended family. Lee Harris with Nick Mason, Saucer Full of Secrets. If they come anywhere near you, go see it. It was awesome. And that music, it was stuff that I hadn't really, I'd heard a little bit back, way back, and never thought that much of, but it still has so much life in it. When they play it live, it's almost like it's brand new. Unlike, Comfortably Numb, and so many of the other ones that have, they've played a lot. But go see them. Nick Mason, Saucer Full of Secrets, awesome. And also then Jonathan Wilson plays with Roger Waters. He's got him. Keith Nelson was the founder of Buck Cherry, kind of some rockers. Although he's not touring with them anymore. He's got a lead 30. I see right up there on your and the DG50, and 412, at least one 412. Matt Ramsey of the big country group Old Dominion. He's the singer, and he sings and plays guitar. He's got a in their live, their touring rig. He's got a HiTone. There's a really big doom band out of Oregon called YOB. Yeah, even if doom's not your thing, you gotta check them out. They're pretty good. Mike, the guitar player, and Aaron, the bassist, they've got HiTones. Both guitarists in the Gin Blossoms, Jesse and Scotty, they've got them. Man, I know I'm forgetting people. Anyway, if you're watching this and I forgot you, I'm sorry.
That's an impressive list. And actually, I'm glad you mentioned Doom, because I got a couple of pedals from Death Fly Effects and Malaise Forever that I'm going to keep the setup here. I hope to do a little bit of a super detune madness here soon. So directional. I'm just going to stand at the side to here and let that go that way. But you mentioned the DR, the DRG, the Gilmore model with the linked input. Let's just maybe talk through the whole range. You do the classic 4-hole, the 2 high, the normal brilliant, and the 2 high, 2 lows, one on each channel. You do the linked import, the Gilmore. You do the Jimmy Page with the input out front, the extra jack out front, I guess, is the boost. And you'll do the CP version, the 4 input with the 4 distinct volumes, no middle, and And no presence on that one either, correct? That's just the bass treble on
Um,
the CP.
yeah, yep, yeah. The 4 inputs, bass, treble, and master volume. Yeah,
What?
that there's
Oh,
one up there.
okay. What is, some people, I mean, there's a love-hate thing with the CP model. I mean, it's more of a Vox tone stack, correct?
Yeah,
It's got your mid is kind of set. And I was talking to someone I was watching Mark's interview. I tend to set the middles just under 12 o'clock. So they're slightly scooped. So is that kind of the range of where the CP103 sits in the mid range, or where does it sit?
that sounds right. Yeah, Mark is probably a better one to ask. To ask. Did you ask Mark that when you had him on?
No, I didn't really. I didn't have
Yeah,
the. But
he is so much better at knowing exactly that type of question, that type of
okay.
answer.
But generally speaking, when you're getting a CP103, is that akin to, and of course on the Hiwatt heads, that's reversed. The highs are on the bottom, lows on the top, or high-tone heads. So you get the 1, 2, 3, 4 channels. Pete usually went on the top left input, right, which technically would be the low normal. Does that translate to the CP104, or are there still too high channels too low, or are they all four kind of similar output, just different tonal path? And then the Jimmy Page model. I didn't talk to Mark about that, but you see, of course, everyone raves about the Albert Hall Page model with the XLR input on the front. That's kind of like a second volume control, right? Not It's vaguely channel switchy, but it's more like a boost or lowering.
Yeah, most guitar players are going to use it as a boost. It's actually a volume cut, but it gives you two distinct levels. One for during the verse, and then one for to use as like a boost for a lead. The JP is really not all that far off from the later 70s, the 2 inputs. I think when Dave made the change to try and to have a little more gain up there, I think he went back. I think whether he went back consciously or not, or just it was just something he just knew. But yeah, they're the 2 inputs are not all that far off, although they you don't get the spitting distortion that sometimes you get, the blocking distortion sometimes you get with the late 70s 2 inputs, that it's not an issue with the JPs.
And now, of course, was the era when the Mesa Boogie was really starting to come to the fore. You see Townsend with in the "Who Are You" in studio kind of rehearsal video, whatever. He's starting to get some Mesa into his back line there. Let's maybe walk through. We've talked about the first 1,000, give or take, of the Hiwatts before Reeves settled on that. Pretty much the strict 4-hole, and banged out a ton of those from 71 to 74. Then around 78-ish is when the 2-hole circuit came about. That's about the transition period.
There were some 2 inputters made for Canada. Gosh, I want to say like 76 or 77, but mainly, yeah, it was mainly for 78 when the 2 inputters went across the board.
And then not long after that, he switched from the turret board to PCBs.
It was 1980. It was for the 1980 model year. So yeah, so 78s and 79 still had the turret boards, and then yeah.
And what would you say the quality of those PCBs was? I mean, obviously that tends to be a failure point for some.
Yeah, those were beefy. They were awfully good PC boards. I mean, I understand why they did it, and but they're not flimsy. Those are I guess, not that we're gonna do it, but I guess if I was gonna do it, it would be like that. but yeah, it's just not the romantic part of it for us.
Right, for sure, for
They were
sure.
they were good. They were very good.
And then let's see, and then of course after Dave passed, the employees got together and tried to keep it running under the Biocron label. They had the OD version, some of the early ones without the overdrive control on the front, the lead models, I guess, and then they did bring a distortion control out front. Did you ever own any of those or have experience with those?
Yeah, actually, my very first one was an '84 504 OL, and man, it was a good amp. It wasn't bad. It was definitely more like it was closer to like a JCM 800 than it was you know, an early '70s 504. But it was okay. It was okay. And then once the obsession just grew and grew, and I was like, oh, this thing's Biocron. Punt this thing down the road.
Right, right. And the Sterling imports too, which was my first non-high watt, but it just killed everything. And there's still, I think and to my untrained eye, I can see a little bit of a trace of some kind of vague bit of DNA in that, but it's those lead 30s that are not like your lead 30s. This actually, back to your range, uses the six V6s to get the power out.
Yeah. That the what I called our lead was based off of a DR103 serial number 954. It was prior to the standardization, and it's weird. It's very similar to the standard early '70s circuit, but it has a cathode follower on V2. It uses both halves of it and really makes it thick, and just has all this grunt. I guess, for a lack of better word, just a lot of grunt. It's kind of it's nastier in a good way.
Would you kind of walk us through the cathode follower concept for those, or maybe not as versed in that?
Basically, it's just doubling the gain right there at the tone stack, and then like the Fenders and Marshalls, at least the earlier ones, they used it with that classic tone stack. I mean, I'd have to sit here and like draw it all out and make sure I follow it, and
For sure.
it'd take me over an hour to try and make sure I explained it, especially and explained it properly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you're playing, I mean, it adds more grunt, and we lowly musicians will be satisfied with that, I think. Or
yeah. Well, as you know, I mean that lead 30, they've got big balls.
Oh yeah, you really,
it's insane. It's insane amount of balls there.
You cannot tell the difference. I mean, again, I'm a little, it holds its own. It's not even it's not straining for anything. It's punishing.
And in '68 or late '67 and some in '68, there was a Hiwatt lead model, and it was even stamped on the serial tag, instead where a lot of them say AP for all purpose, it was lead. And so I was like, I didn't know what to call this thing. I was like, what am I going to call it? Martha or Ethel, or I don't know. So I'll just call it a lead for, I don't know, because I just wasn't feeling very creative, I guess. But and now I have a slight variation of it, which I'm not sure. I guess right now I'm calling it a lead 1.1, but it's more what you would find in the like typically in like the late 500 and early 600 serial number range. It's fun. It's a fun little amp.
Excellent.
Very similar to, like, if you're after like the Martin Barr sound.
Oh, cool.
course, his were 100s and 200s, but still, it's a fun amp. It's a little grittier, a little raunchier, but than your classic, early 70s, but it's cool.
So do you offer both variants of that now, or have you switched away from the version one to the?
No, I still have both of them. My life would be a lot easier if I didn't. My life would be a whole lot easier if I just had one model. But I guess that makes us a lot more of a true custom shop, because it's one of this and one of this and one of this. But yeah, I'm still making both. I mean, we're not, I'm not making the 30 watt platform anymore.
Right. Let's talk about the low watts, I guess.
The 30s are great, and they sound really good, and they're really reliable, but they don't make a good marketing sense or business sense. They cost us more than the 50s do. They're almost exactly as loud as a 50. They're actually a little bit heavier than a 50. So it's like, and most people think, oh, well, a 30 it's going to be at least a couple $100 cheaper than a 50, and there's no point in, we're not making hardly any money anyway. It's not like we want to we'll just make the 30s and give them away. So the low watt filled a niche. They actually sound truer to a 50. They're lighter. They are significantly lower volume, so you can tell. It's and for they're the closest. They're the closest to working for us as like for a bedroom amp. Most homes you can get away with it. Now, if you have somebody sleeping in the room next door, you still can't, because they are still surprisingly ballsy. I mean, I think that's the lowest I think you can get, and still have the same dynamics and the same punch and response that you would with a 70s 504 103. And they're terrific. That's what I've got at home. That's what Mark has at home.
Nice. They're beautiful too.
Well,
they all are. I mean, they all are. You get that nice salt and pepper kind of a weave there. Someone had put gold piping on this one. Do you offer the gold piping as well? I think you offer.
If somebody really wants it, I will. Yeah. But I'm not. When we first started, me and a carpenter buddy of mine were doing the cabs, and I don't do any of the cab work anymore. There's just not the time. If somebody really wants one, I can get it made with it. Some of the Tolex, you're kind of limited on the Tolex offerings with the round over edges on the cabs. It has to be a thinner vinyl or it won't stay glued down. If it's a thicker, stronger Tolex or vinyl, it'll end up lifting up on you. That's why some amp makers have the corners and corner protectors and stuff. It holds it down, and you don't have to have quite as much of a skillfully made seam right there. And
how important to the cabinets is that slight thin opening across the bottom of the back there? How much is that really affecting the tone?
Not a whole lot.
Okay.
Technically, with if you're doing like computer simulation, almost all programs would consider these cabs a closed back cab, because the porting is so minimal. So I do it just because I'm a diehard, and I want to be true to the originals. But gosh, I don't know. That'd be interesting if we ever have another vintage Hiwatt convention. I'll just have to mock them up, so that would be the only difference, and see what you can really tell.
What about running them with the back open? Have you, any thoughts on how that affects tone? Do you have any folks who are actually
It takes away a lot of the punch and a lot of the directionality. Yeah, you lose some of that kick you in the gut that it's famous for. But yeah, it doesn't hurt anything.
Have you ever tried any of the cabinets where you kind of, mix the DRFs and the 231s kind of in a cross pattern or anything like that?
Yeah. I for a little while back in like 2017, I think 17 or 18, I did a short run of another speaker that I called the DRF2. It wasn't, it was, it had a lot of similarities to several of the different 1970s Fane Hiwatt models, but it definitely, it wasn't any one of them. And I liked it. So I had to make just one batch of them. And there was a couple guys we did that. We mixed the DRFs and the DRF2s in it, and it was a good sounding rock cab. The F2s were really fat, really big mids. But let me see. I haven't done it. I haven't done that. Yeah, I haven't done it for a few years.
Another thing, you've got a half power switch on a lot of these. If I understood correctly, are you still doing that or no?
No, you have to be careful and alert with it. And if you're, if it gets bumped or you're playing clubs and you have a couple beers or something, because it works a whole lot better if you also switch the impedance at the same time. So it's hard on the tubes. I've had a couple late 60s DR103s that had factory half power switches in them. I have a pretty good idea why they went away with it then too, because it's just if you're not careful, you're gonna kill your tube life. And and you don't want to flip it, and especially kill one mid gig or something. So it was good in concept. It's just not very many people, it's not very often you're gonna be that careful all the time, and things need to be simpler, I think. Like with the 30, the low watts, they just sound so much better than the 30 does at half power. It's like it's simpler.
Yeah, it's the difference between, say, a true 50 watt head and 100 running at 50, right? I mean, that's
right.
Effects loops you offer.
Yeah, Mark designed one for us. It runs off an additional 12 AT7. We put it right in the empty preamp tube spot between V1 and V2. They work well. I have no use for them whatsoever. Most of the people that want them are like new to this type of amp. They're coming from like an Orange or something that doesn't have the amount of headroom, and they think they've got to have this loop. And these amps, they just don't need it.
Interesting.
I know you really want this, and I'm just going to give you my opinion this one time, and I think you'd be better off saving your money, or go buy some cool pedal. Take that money and buy a cool pedal or something. You're probably not going to use this loop. And but if somebody wants it, we'll put it in.
What are some of your favorite pedals to run through?
There aren't very many that these amps don't like. The original Tube Screamer, the 808, is, I don't know. I don't think it works very good with these. I mean, some people use them, but they seem to like, the Fender Marshall type preamp a whole lot better. But gosh, they like everything. Lately, my, I've a buddy of mine in England has a kind of an effects startup company. and he's kind of going along the same lines as what Pete Cornish did. He's taking some of his favorite pedals, and he's beefing up the power supply and the filtration, and some buffering, and just really making. His name's Phil Robinson. It's Phil Robinson effects pedals. God, he's got a silicone fuzz that's awesome, a compressor, and so those are the only things like really brand new that I've had a chance to even fiddle with.
The phase inverter, speaking of the tube order, that V123, you can change. Do you ship with AT7s as your PI, or do you notice the difference?
Yeah. It'll run with the AX7, but it's a little fizzier and grainier sounding. And I just don't like it. I just like the clean punch of it. And it's not a great big difference, but I can tell it, and I definitely prefer the AT7.
And in terms of replacing caps, I mean, obviously yours are brand new. They're well within a lifespan of tubes, but caps. But just the age-old question is, when should you replace your capacitors, your filter caps? And having owned so many Hiwatts, I know, having kind of been inspired by Mark's registry, that I kind of keep a ton of full photos of gut shots, and I feel like it's about 50-50, 60-40. Yes or no, that folks have replaced their really old, like even back to a 70, even a 69, if you ever see a 69 Hiwatt on occasion. But a lot of those old caps are still in there. Where do you fall on the, you've just got to take them out and replace them, or you still test them to see if
well, if they're not leaking and the amp sounds good, then I don't change them. If they're leaking and you can see it leaking, I change them before I ever even try it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done it on 68, 69, 70. It doesn't matter. And someday if an amp, if you get one, it sounds, just kind of weird, just not quite right. And you retube it and it still has the same kind of weirdness. I've had one, it almost sounded like a drip, like a faint, like water drip, with a little bit of fuzz on it or something, just bizarre. And so I recapped it, and then it was like a brand new, 40, 50-year-old amp all over again. But if they look okay and the amp sounds okay, then I leave them alone. But
what about if you see just that little bit of bulge? Because you'll see a lot with that, not leaking, but maybe on the verge.
I don't know. I've left them, so if there's an amp where one or two of them are leaking, and the white crusty stuff's coming out, I replace them all. Some of them in there may just be a little bit bulged, or may not even look bulged at all. But if I'm gonna do it to one or two of them, I'm just gonna do them all. On an amp where none of them are leaking, and there's just there's a little bit of a bulge going on in one or two of them, but it sounds okay, I leave it. They do last a surprisingly long time. I don't know. I've replaced a lot of them.
Will you be attending any shows, any NAMM or NAMM-like things, or can people come to your showroom?
I would like to get back to where we could. Since COVID hit, our lead times are through the roof. I usually have these three heads behind me here because they're just kind of shop rats. And there's like a mounting screw, the press fit nuts and the chassis that you mount them through the head cab into the bottom of the head cab with. Like we had a few of them where they weren't in right and they were popping loose. Well, that's what that lead 50 is right there. It doesn't so these are ones that I don't want to sell as new, and they're not perfect. Maybe we can get back to where we have some inventory to try out. We did have kind of a showroom, trial room. Right now it's got a pallet of DRFs in it and a bunch of empty cabinets, and there's just a little area to walk through. That'd be great. I'd like to get back to that.
Have you been to a lot of the NAMM shows at all, or
not the winter one? It's not worth it for us because we don't have a dealer network. We're not pumping out the numbers, to take advantage of economies of scale. We did the summer NAMM a couple times, and it was fun. It was fun getting to see people, but the decibel police were always on us because we looked insanely loud, and they threatened to kick us out the last one. And it was, the only amps we even had plugged in were a couple low watts, but there was a booth right behind us that had, I think they were using like a Paul Reed Smith 50-watt head and a 212, and so they'd always come and jump on our case, and I was like, no thanks, I'm not giving you any more money. And it was kind of fun until they made it not fun.
I don't get that rock and roll is about volume, guys. I mean, that's the kind of the point.
Yeah, the people around us knew it wasn't us, but when somebody's like, oh, that corner of the hall,
right.
There's some really loud volumes coming from that corner of the hall. It must be the one with all the amps and stacks, and
jeez.
Even though the only ones even plugged in were the 18 watts. So. Oh well.
There you go. It just looks dangerous, It's
they do, yeah.
It's and it is. What is for you? For me, it's Leeds or Hull is like the definitive, where you really hear Townsend kind of working.
Yeah, yeah.
What is
live at Leeds is just awesome. It's probably the definitive sound, the definitive Hiwatt sound for me.
He's really using that. I mean, he's got, and they tend to like single coils. Would you say that's fair to say over the humbucker, a little more, just a touch, maybe?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, at least like a P90. Although I got to tell you, I've heard Mark Huss play, a Les Paul into a cranked early 70s DR103, and sounds, I mean, a bunch of us were right outside the building talking, and we're like, who is that? We had to go in and look, and it was Mark. And yeah, he's I hear people say, oh, you can't get a CP103 sound out of a DR103. Well, like, I know somebody that can. Yeah. And oh geez, it was, that was a lot of fun.
And it breaks up.
Oh yeah, but yeah, they love P90s, and they do like I have several guitarists that just like path type output humbuckers, and yeah, they love them. Both DRs and CPs and any of them.
Is there anything that you could add about the Hiwatt, HiTone mystique, any other kind of myth busting we can do here? Anything that you've got coming planned that you may be tinkering with?
I've got some prototypes of some of our speakers with the neodymium magnets in it, so they're really lightweight, and a couple of them sound pretty damn close. But they're a lot more expensive, and I don't know, I hate to invest that much into into an order of them and have people afraid to try them. And how long am I going to sit on this expenditure? Especially since we do it on the side, like all the capital came from me, and which we're we're in the black, so it works. We pay the rent and pay the utilities, but it's hard to I don't know. Right. We need to get more people trying the low watts, because everybody that tries one's like, oh my gosh.
Sure. Well, and you've got demo videos, to be clear. You've got a good number of demos on your YouTube channel, which we'll point to.
Yeah. Yeah. We may, although the time's flying by on us, we were hoping to have, another open house or some kind of function here. It'd be fun. It'd be good to get some people in here. Of course, that means I have to somehow find more hours in the week to build more gear, which I already work about 80 or 90 hours a week.
Do any of your patients know that you build amps?
Yeah, several of them do. Although I try to be quiet while we have patients, because it's next door. This our building where HiTone is used to be an H&R Block, tax and accounting services and stuff, and then they moved out, and I was getting really tired of doing this in my garage, and some of our initial chassis, they were zinc plated 18 gauge mild steel, exactly like the ones from the 70s. And I'd be working in the garage and like sweat would drip down on me. And then I'd see it a few weeks later, and it would be like this rust, starting to corrode and everything from my sweat. So that's one thing that's not technically vintage correct on ours anymore, is I've changed the chassis to stainless steel, which Dave probably would have done in the 70s if it weren't cost prohibitive. But yeah, my sweat's corrosive, and I've on some of the swamp rat amps, and that you can see kind of my fingerprints on them and stuff. And it's like, yeah, I don't want that. I want them to stay looking nice. So they're stainless steel now.
They are beautiful. Is it powder coated too, or is that a? No,
just a raw. There's a couple of them that they ran through some sort of almost like a shot beating or something. And the way when they weld the corners, it kind of, when you heat it up, you get some of that discoloring, and sometimes they'll use some sort of acid wash and stuff on them to clean them up. But no, it's basically really just a raw stainless.
And you sign all the chassis, or there's some you haven't?
No, I'm pretty sure I have. Yeah, once it's all done, and before I put the serial number tag on, I sign it. Not the same as like when kind of a misconception with the Harry Joyce amps, because a lot of them that said Harry Joyce on them, it wasn't his signature. It was somebody from his shop, and they were the largest subcontractor that Dave Reeves had. So you'll see one on eBay or Reverb, and it's, oh, super rare Harry Joyce. Well, actually, the Harry Joyce ones were the most common ones from the 70s. So that's kind of a internet spoof there, or not spoof, but myth, I guess.
All right.
Nothing bad about him. Harry's guys did a great job, but yeah, he didn't. I guess there was he and Dave Reeves had a big fight at the Hiwatt shop, mid 70s, when Harry found out he wasn't the only subcontractor, and so that, and then they started marking them all so that to make sure that they got paid for the ones that they, all of them that came from Harry Joyce were designated, from Harry Joyce. And yeah, I guess that was, Glynn said there was a little heated discussion one day.
Well, sir, thank you so much. HiTone, I got a personal attestation. Every time I plugged in, I've had an absolute blast. It's always inspiring. Thank you so much. I think I'll speak on behalf of a few folks who own them and say thank you. And if you haven't tried them, you're not going to go wrong. I mean, this is a blatant endorsement. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, every so often I hear that, it's the best sounding, they're the best. They sound better than they did in the, in the 70s, or as good. And it's just the fact that, they're, as meticulous as we were, and trying to make sure that all the materials are right, all the components are right. And then, you got brand new pots. You're not grabbing a 40-some-year-old scratchy pot. And, it just, that's what it is. But we're supposed to, ours are supposed to stand up, or we wouldn't do it.
And they do without a doubt. Thank you, sir. And
You're welcome.
Best wishes for continued success.
It's old, so it's made
That's fantastic.
made up just outside of Cleveland. Those Rogers were arguably the premier drum kit, or I guess Premier was another brand, but they were like the Cadillac of drum kits in the late 50s and throughout the 60s.
Yeah.
So, let me see, there's
Wow.
the 200 and a 215, bunch of cabs. Let me see here. That's where I was sitting. There's this combo I just got finished yesterday.
Saw that one. Yeah,
it is sweet. The guy that bought it, his brother bought Gilmore's Red Strat at that auction 2 years ago. Work in progress shelves. My workshop's pretty messy. Oh, here's an old corroded early chassis. Can you see it at all? Or low watt combo on this. That's where I work.